Hello, everybody. We got Kyri Baker on today, who is a professor at my alma mater, University of Colorado. So, hi.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me.
Sure. So, tell us, give everybody your background on
So,
energy and so.
yeah, I'm an electrical engineer. Did all my degrees at Carnegie Mellon, so trained in basic electrical engineering as well as power systems. So that was my PhD, was focusing on how we can operate the grid more efficiently using intelligent algorithms. Then I joined the National Renewable Energy Lab, or NREL, which is in Golden, Colorado, working on buildings. So how can we have buildings and the grid interact in a more optimal way? And then I became a professor at CU Boulder in 2017. And I just got tenure last year and I'm on sabbatical right now. So, researching everything from electric vehicle adoption up to energy policies and how they impact the operation of these critical pieces of infrastructure.
And what's it like teaching there? Were all of us students just wonderful?
Most of them are. I really love teaching. That has actually been hard about being on parental leave and sabbatical, as I miss teaching.
Okay. What do you think? That's the right answer, by the way. What do you think's the most interesting part of the grid?
The most interesting part. I think some of the most interesting parts are actually in distribution. So as you might be familiar with, the grid is kind of divided into three pieces. There's generation, so power plants, transmission, large scale power lines, and then distribution, which are the smaller scale, lower voltage power lines that connect consumers. And I really think, there's a lot of focus on, oh, we're going to run out of power. There's going to be too many AI data centers that are sucking that power out of the grid. But a lot of the issues actually also lie in distribution. So transformers, the green boxes in your neighborhood, the little cylinders on your power poles, those are actually a huge bottleneck to a lot of our clean energy goals, a lot of electrification goals. And I think people should pay more attention to those.
In what way are they a bottleneck?
Well, they can only carry so much power. So if you think about the circuit breakers in your house, they trip when you plug in too many hair dryers and there's too many electrons being pulled. And the reason they trip is for safety to avoid overheating and possibly starting fires. So in the power grid, the transformers, when it boils down to it, are also just wires. They have coils of wire that use kind of, electromagnetism to transmit magnetic energy that changes the voltage level for something that we use in our house, 120 to 240 volts. But those things can only carry so much power. So if you look at a neighborhood where people are getting electric vehicles or getting heat pumps to replace their gas furnace, all of which are good things, but that's putting additional strain on these little devices that weren't initially sized for this. The transformer in your neighborhood might be 30 years old, and this was before summers were super hot and before you got an electric vehicle.
I hadn't thought of that. So, yeah, the wire from that transformer to the house is fine, but everybody in the neighborhood suddenly maxing that out is the problem.
Well, that one might not be fine either. It depends on your individual house. But
That's true if it's old.
yeah.
It's interesting. I was talking to a lineman, and he was saying some of the stuff is so old that he thinks some of the wires they bring down are from the late 1800s. They're just pure copper. And he
Wow.
says they bring them down, and it says it's almost like ribbon, how they almost melt in their hands and just flow.
Wow. I would love to
So,
see that.
yeah, so when you talk about the distribution being old, yeah.
That's really old. I was thinking, 30 to 40 to possibly 60 years, but that's
Yeah, no,
pretty
no,
old.
no. Talk to the substation and lineman people, and there's stuff out there. It's scary how old it is. What's your main worries about the grid?
Well, yeah, I guess one of them is that people aren't paying enough attention to distribution. And another one is just how weather's impacting the grid. Maybe it's just because, I have a child now, but I feel like there have been more outages than I've ever experienced in Colorado in the past couple of years. And I think that's kind of the case everywhere. It's like we're shutting off power during high winds to prevent wildfires, but the power's also being impacted by, snowstorms and then other wildfires that might burn down power poles. And it's just really stressing the grid, and we're relying on it more and more. Like, we need the grid to communicate, to charge our car potentially, to have indoor lighting, refrigeration. It's just, we need it for everything. And weather is making that a little bit harder.
It's interesting because I've heard the same thing, and I went and looked at the numbers, and as best I can tell, the grid has not had longer or more outages. But someone brought up a very good point. What's your thought on this? Is that 20 years ago, power went out, we lit some candles, we sat around and talked, and the only thing we lost was TV. Power goes out now, and it's oh my God, I can't charge the car, I can't get on social media, I can't get on the internet, my life is over.
That's true, but there's definitely more outages that are sort of, what's the right word? Like the utility is cutting power on purpose more
Yeah,
now. So those kind of outages have increased, and that's because of disasters like the 2018 Camp Fire, the Marshall Fire in Colorado,
yeah.
or potentially the Eaton Fire in California. So we're getting a lot more of these public safety power shutoffs.
All right, so with all of that, how do you see the grid evolving over the next 15 years?
Well, I think we're going to see a lot of people still moving towards things like in-home batteries and rooftop solar. It's like I'm personally very annoyed when the power goes out and I'm looking towards, looking at how I can be an independent little microgrid of my house. And so a lot of people I think are in the same boat. I'm annoyed with my utility. How can I be more independent? Now that comes with a caveat because a lot of solar panels actually disconnect during the grid outage for safety reasons. But you can get a transfer switch that sort of allows you to still use your rooftop solar during a grid outage. We're also going to see a lot more strain. So like I mentioned before, data centers, these things are massive. We're talking potentially gigawatts
Hmm.
in a single state being added. So we're going to be installing new generation a lot faster. I'm hoping it's not the case, but we might also see some coal plants delay retirement and other fossil fuel sources, and potentially other new investments too, like in geothermal and maybe small modular reactors for nuclear power.
Okay. And so, speaking of nuclear, what are your thoughts? I was on a panel last night for the state of Colorado. There's pretty clear a number of people in the legislature that are advocating for nuclear for the baseload power. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons, and the biggest con is the cost and the time to construction. The only plant that was constructed in recent memory in the United States was the Vogtle plant in
Yeah,
Georgia.
yeah.
And that one is billions of dollars over budget, delays, all these things. I know it's very hard to construct a nuclear plant. There's a lot of safety considerations, but that sort of brings to mind, maybe we should be looking at things like geothermal and other sources of clean energy that can be installed faster and still provide this large level of dispatchability. That said, I'm not against nuclear. It's clean, it's relatively reliable compared to some generation sources. It's just that time and cost thing. And obviously, we don't have a waste management plan like we should.
All right, so any final thoughts for everybody?
I think I said my bit about distribution grids, which is what I really like to focus on. Yeah, don't be afraid of the grid going down. Things like electric vehicles are great cars, and just a little bit of a plug towards that. During an outage, you can stay in your EV to stay warm because you won't have carbon monoxide poisoning. So there's also a side benefit to having electric devices in your home.
And I will agree with you. The distribution part is probably the most ignored part of the grid.
Yeah, people like thinking about the big flashy stuff,
Yeah.
but distribution's important.
All right. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.